When I was a kid, growing up in Auckland, New Zealand, we were really lucky. Like I've said this a few times. Also, before I start this sort of podcast style video, I just want to say that this is going to be completely uncensored. I have sworn in my videos previously, but this one I'm going to speak how I actually normally do, with no care in the world of offending anyone. And because YouTube doesn't let me become a YouTube partner, they make it quite difficult now, just so that they can then play ads on your own videos and make money themselves. So if I swear like a sailor, they can't monetize my video. So fuck you to them. Anyway, I thought I'd have like a little car talk video, something a little bit different, because I like talking about cars. And if people like it, then they like it. If they don't, I won't make any of these again. And I was thinking about, like, just recently, how people who really want to do like the best by their cars end up destroying it. Completely sane, normal people that end up fucking up their nice new cars or used cars. And I guess my history on that starts because I lived in New Zealand for so many years. I grew up there, and we were so spoiled in that era where New Zealand was so different to the rest of the world. Like when I came to Australia here, I realized just how like sleazy used car dealers are, because over here in Australia, the used car dealers basically sit on the internet all day, scouring cars to buy off the private person, and they try to screw them out of as much money as possible, buy that car, they douse the fucking engine bay in silicon and polish it up, and then just put it on the lot for like a $10,000 markup. And in New Zealand, that if a car dealer was to do that, they would be seen as being incredibly unethical. Most of the dealers, and even up to this day in New Zealand, have people based in Japan, or the owner of that company will fly over to Japan like twice a month, basically, and just buy a whole heap of cars and put them on boats and send them to New Zealand. So while we had like every car in New Zealand, from Ferraris and Maseratis and old school American cars, I mean, New Zealand's one of those countries where if there were two examples of one car made, like an exquisite supercar, you would find one of those in New Zealand. And what I'm trying to say is the bread and butter cars in New Zealand were always Japanese imports. Like when you went to school, your teachers drove Japanese imports, your parents drove Japanese imports, your friends' parents drove Japanese imports. It was just one of those things. They were all freshly imported from Japan. We call them New Zealand new because that means it was the first time they were being sold in New Zealand. And that's where everyone got their cars. You'd drive down, there were certain areas in New Zealand that were just packed right next to each other with used car dealers, and you'd just have a sea of cars to choose from, and they were cheap. They were really cheap back then, and it never really stood out to us in New Zealand that when you got into like a Nissan Primera or a Honda Accord or a Toyota Corolla or a Camry or whatever, Land Cruiser, that all of the writing inside the car was in Japanese. Like when you look at the sun visor in a car, and it normally says how to operate the four-wheel drive system, and don't put a child in the front seat because it'll be killed by the airbag or whatnot. All that's, normally written in English, but in New Zealand, obviously, it's all in Japanese. And it made sense to us. We never once stopped to question it because, it's a Japanese car, so obviously the writing's going to be in Japanese. We never actually thought that, hey, around the world, there would be cars built specifically for that market, and so everything will be in the right, appropriate language. Like when I got to Australia and I saw my Land Cruiser 80 Series had English writing all over the place, I was like, oh, that's interesting, that's different, and only then did my eyes kind of open up to that. Talking about car dealers in New Zealand in like, say, 1999, 2000, you would drive past them, you'd go in to see a few cars, and on the lot there would be all the usual sort of sedans and station wagons and Prados and Land Cruisers, stuff like that. There'll be, in the corner, there will be like 4 or 5 Skylines. There'll be a GTS-T 4-door, a GTS 2-door, a GTS 4, and maybe another GTS-T. And then inside the dealership, there'll be like 1 or 2 GTRs. and R32 GTR New Zealand at the time would cost you about 23,000 New Zealand, which is was probably about 17,000 American. Done about 80,000 kilometers, freshly imported, polished, waxed, detailed, all good to go. And you think about that now, you're like, fuck, that's a bargain. It's so cheap. And you'd see an RX-7, RX-7 would be about 22,000, 23, about the same as a GTR. The twin-turbo Supras, RZ Supras, were always worth a little bit more. They would go for about 27. I've seen them all the way up to about 33,000 New Zealand dollars. And yeah, so I mean, cars are really cheap. And if you didn't want to buy a New Zealand new car from the dealership, you could pick up a GTR for about 17,000 New Zealand dollars, just used. And now, if you go to New Zealand, you'd think, like, we were the only country outside of Japan who probably had the same amount of Japanese imports rolling around our streets. So if Japan had, say, 2,000 Skyline GTRs, New Zealand would probably have like 2,200 Skyline GTRs at some point. It's so much so, to put it into context, that cars have been exported out of New Zealand for people looking at Japanese imports. People have gone to Japan, not found what they wanted, and then gone to New Zealand, got what they wanted, and then bought it from there. And because we were so spoiled, we had all of these cars at our disposal, basically. They were cheap, they were plentiful, they're everywhere. And it was during that stage where every suburb, every corner, fucking street corner, had like a tuning shop. You had like a shop that was importing suspension parts, a shop that had like Greddy and truss parts and HKS parts straight out of Japan, and a lot of knowledge on modified imports as well. So you could drop your car off and get things put on, the right parts out of Japan for your Japanese import, done properly and tuned, and you'd be on the way, on the road. Unfortunately, during that time, we never really appreciated how any of these cars looked in the original form. The MR2 looked like shit. The Skylines looked like shit. They definitely needed a body kit. Like, that was the mentality then. The Supra just looked hideous. You had to get a body kit on the Supra. And you had all these like custom body kit places that would do like fiberglass body kits. They'd import them as well, but a lot of them were also custom. You could get whatever you wanted, basically, and for like $1,000 you could have like a front bumper, a rear bumper, and side skirts. And for a little bit more, they'd paint it and fit it as well, and your original bumpers went straight in the rubbish bin. You'd change the seats out, and your original seats went straight in the rubbish bin because no one wanted the original parts then. They were everywhere. They were so plentiful. For example, there was a car called the Nissan Safiro. So Nissan, back in the day, was the coolest Japanese manufacturer because they had the biggest variety of performance cars. And on their Skyline platform, they built a few other cars based on that platform, which meant that it fit an RB engine, basically. All the holes were pre-drilled for everything. And the Safiro was probably one of the cheapest and the most plentiful. Most of them were automatic non-turbos that only made a small, tiny, minuscule handful of factory turbo manuals, both in rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. Essentially a Skyline GTS-T and a Skyline GTS-4 in like a more elegant sedan body. And so what we would do is we'd go to the wrecking yard, we'll pick up a RB25 DET engine and gearbox and the wiring harness and things like that. And would get that for about $2,000, and for about $3,000 all up, you'd have yourself a Skyline GTS 25T, and you could go drifting in it and stuff, and all of the interiors got stripped out and thrown into the rubbish bin. And we never preserved anything. Like, these cars were everywhere. We never stopped to think like they're going to be gone tomorrow. That just wasn't the case. You just modified them and drove them and didn't really look after them. No oil changes, things like that. You'd rather spend your money on performance parts. And almost overnight, all of that dried up. Those shops closed down. Everything was gone. The cars devalued. They got older. The cars that were in New Zealand had faded paint. No one looked after them. The tires were bald. Wheel bearings are gone. Interiors were missing bits and pieces. We had screwed holes throughout the dashboard to fit these gauges. You know, if the rev counter went to 8,000 and the car redlined at 7,000, it wouldn't go over 7,400 RPM. We would fit one of those massive fucking autometer rev counters. Remember those with a big bucket shift light? And the rev limiter on that thing went to like 11,000. And even though your car revved out at 7,400 and had no chance in hell of getting higher than that, we would still fit one of those fucking ugly tachometers, along with, like, you know, intake temp, the intake pressure, boost, exhaust temp, coolant temp, all of these different things like people are still doing today. You know, you'd fit all this sort of shit to your car because it looked cool. And then the Fast and Furious movies came out and validated all of that, and it was just everywhere. You know, decals were going on. Chrome wheels are a big thing. Can you imagine like Evos rolling around in fucking chrome wheels today? Ugh, just hideous. But that was the shit back in the day. We did all that. And we basically just completely fucking destroyed thousands upon thousands upon thousands of those cars. And then we just got off it. Once all the stores closed down, interest was dying off on it. Those cars weren't looking as nice as they once did. All of those aftermarket performance parts didn't age well. The plastics, the bonnet scoops, the mirrors, all of these little tiny things that you put on, they didn't age well because they didn't have the same level of quality as the original equipment. You know, when people make cars, they test out the plastics on the grills and things like that and the windscreen surrounds. They know that it's going to age gracefully with the rest of the car. But with a lot of these aftermarket manufacturers, they don't do that. They just make shit as cheaply as possible. And then, as you know, within a couple of years, it just starts to look like shit. And you can't go back because where's the original parts that you pulled off? They're now like pencil sharpeners because they've all been recycled or they're crushed somewhere. And I saw that with, after that performance car stage sort of died down, I saw that with the four-wheel drive utes. What do you call them in America? Trucks, pickup trucks. So when the Ford Ranger started becoming really popular in Australia around 2013 onwards, that was before we had the Raptor variant here. And so a lot of these manufacturers, aftermarket manufacturers, started coming out with these fake bonnet scoops. Like we used to have them back in the day, fake plastic bonnet scoops and these fake plastic Raptor grills. And you'd see it all over the place. Like these people would just buy this like $50,000 pickup truck and then go put this shitty fucking plastic bonnet scoop on it. And it just looks so bad. I mean, even when it was new, it just looks so bad because you know it's fake. It's like a 1 foot fucking tall plastic scoop, plastic bucket on the bonnet of this car. And just within a couple of years, that plastic faded. The double-sided tape that was used to hold it down would like start lifting because the plastic warped. And so it would be lifting in certain areas and you could see right fucking through it. It just looked like shit. And the same went for like the wheel flares. They put these double-sided taped wheel flares on and they had these fake plastic rivets on it that were painted chrome to make it look like it was riveted on. And you see those cars now, they're only like, 5-6 years old, but boy, do they look trashy. And it's funny because you see the people driving them and they're sort of like what do you call them? The rednecks. We call them bogans in Australia. They don't really have any sense of class. And it reminds me of me because when I was younger, I had my first car that I actually paid for. My first car I got when I was 12, but I bought my first car when I was 13, was a freshly imported 1991 Toyota Synos. It was silver. It had these beautiful wheels on it. They were original size alloys. The interior was nice. It was completely perfect. Just a nice car to drive. But back then, you got to remember, like when you're seeing all the kids that are older than you, a few years older than you, and adults and stuff, and they're driving around in beautiful GTS 4 Skylines and Supras and RX-7s and things like that, and you're surrounded by these nice performance cars in traffic all day, and you're sitting there in a 1.5 litre front-wheel drive manual. It doesn't seem that cool. It's just a front-wheel drive car. You didn't think it was a nice car then. And as a kid, I did the same same sort of shit. You know, I painted the bonnet black using like a $3 can of spray paint because I thought it was cool. I bought like some $9 bonnet pins that, you know, the old muscle cars used to have, and I don't know how I even fucking drew. I think I used a chisel or something and just smashed through the bonnet into the cross member in the front and screwed those bonnet pins in. And within like 3 months, the bonnet pins had rusted out and the bonnet was all faded and it looked like shit. Me and my friends thought it was, thought it was really cool. And we'd get a lot of looks from people, and I thought, well, they're checking out my car, but really, they must have just seen me as some classless prick. Like, that's how I look at people today. You know, the whole black bonnet thing is coming back, if you haven't noticed. I smoke, and so I'll be standing on my balcony here in Perth and looking down at the traffic, and there'll be like a 1999 Toyota Land Cruiser, or like a 2004 Toyota Land Cruiser, and it's gold in color or green in color or something like that. And it'll have a black bonnet. It's usually faded paint, faded black, like I did on my car, so you know it's half-assed. Or you'd see like a Holden Commodore sedan pull up and it'll have a black bonnet. And doesn't matter what it is, like a Honda Civic or something, it'll have a black bonnet. And I'm starting to think, like, why the fuck did we do that? Like, why are people still doing that? I was trying to remember, like, why did I paint my bonnet black? And then it came to me. So my friend had a Honda Prelude. It was like a 94 Prelude. He did a shit ton of work to his one back in the day. And it was a really nice car. And he's the only one out of everyone that I knew, not just my friends, everyone that I knew in New Zealand that paid any attention to maintenance. When I got paid, with that Synos that I'm talking about, my first car that I bought, I didn't change the oil in it once in 3 years. I just thrashed the fucking daylights out of that car. And it worked, it was fine. But my friend, he gave his car an oil change every 6 months. He looked after it. Anyway, we would just cruise around back in the day and stop by all these performance parts shops. We knew everyone behind the counter. We'd talk to them about what they got in, new coilover suspension, things like that. And at one of the auto body shops, they said that they had a stock shipment coming in of carbon fiber bonnets for a Honda Prelude. And so they knew he'd want one, so they set one aside for him, and he picked it up. It was like $400 something, really cheap, considering the whole thing was carbon fiber. It was really beautifully made as well. And he went and picked it up, and then that trend kind of kicked off back in the day where a lot of guys were buying carbon fiber bonnets for their Skylines and things like that. And around the same time, fiberglass bonnets were coming out as well. And so the fiberglass bonnets were usually painted in like a primer grey, and you would leave it in that primer grey just so everyone knew you had like a fiberglass bonnet. Or the carbon fiber bonnets, a lot of the guys at that time didn't like the look of bare carbon fiber, so we would paint them black. And so that was the hype. If you saw someone driving around with a black bonnet, you didn't know if it was a carbon fiber bonnet or if it was just painted black. Usually if it was a carbon fiber bonnet, it would have a high quality paint job on it, not like, we're doing, but it doesn't make sense to me why people are still doing that today with like their hatchbacks, their Hyundai hatchbacks and shit, or their Mitsubishi Mirage, 1.6 litre, 1.5 litre front wheel drive automatic. It's got a black bonnet on it. It's got one of those steel spoilers that we used to put on, just drill through the fucking boot, slap it on. It's got rust all over the fucking spoiler and an exhaust the size of like one of those big fucking coffee cans. Exactly what I did to my car back in the day. And it just looks so classless now, doesn't it? It just looks like shit. And I was thinking the other day, like, I'm just going to see how much those Toyota Synoses go for. Because, like, now that I think about it, that was such a nice car. Like, back in the day, yes, front-wheel drive, 1.5 litre, seems a little bit lame. But now, it was so light. It was like 860 kilograms. It did 160 kilometers an hour in third gear. Actually, one of my friends, when I was like 15, he didn't believe me that it could do 160 in third gear. His dad was a bit of a car guy, and so me and him became friends. And one day after school, I said, "I'm not working today. You want to see it do 160k in third?" And he said, "Yeah, all right. But I got my younger brother with me. I got to take him home and stuff. Or can you drop us home?" And I said, "Yeah, I can drop you home." And so his little brother hopped in the back, and he hopped in the front seat, and we went down. There's this one stretch of road. It was a little bit remote. And I headed down there. I had the big exhaust on and my black bonnet and stuff, and into third gear. I had thrown the original nice gear knob away for one of these $10 fucking plastic aluminium things. If I sound a little bit congested, it's because I got bronchitis. Anyway, 160 kilometers an hour in third gear. Still wasn't redlining. It's still there's a slight incline on the thing that didn't have much power. And he's like, holy shit, this is the greatest thing on earth. And we became pretty good friends after that. But actually the next day, his mother found me. So his younger brother went home and said, oh, Mum, I had the coolest drive today. This Indian guy gave me and my brother a ride home, and he was doing 160 kilometers an hour in third gear. It was so cool. And his mum was like, he fucking did what? And so she found me the next day, and she's like, do you even have a fucking license? Like, how old are you? I'm like, oh, the same age as your son. She's like, why are you even driving on your own? And I was like, I don't know, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, do not ever take my fucking kids for a ride in your car ever again. And I was like, okay. And, you know, nowadays, when I think back to that, I'm like, she was so fucking right. I'm surprised with all the shit that I've done that I haven't killed myself, let alone anyone else. And, you know, today, if someone came home, if your child came home and said, went in this guy's car and he was doing 160 kilometers an hour in the rain yesterday, after school, you would fucking lose your shit, wouldn't you? So she was right. But me and that guy became pretty good friends, and that wasn't the last time we did anything crazy. So yeah, over the years I destroyed that Synos, and I was thinking, like, I'm gonna see if I can buy one here, because it must be worth like $1,000 now, right? Like maximum. I paid $1,400 for mine back in the day when I was 13, and I was searching and nothing came up. I couldn't find anything. There was none of them for sale. And so eventually, a few months later, one popped up, and it was like $10,000. It was red, it was automatic, and I was like, what? 10 grand? And the owner obviously knew that it was quite a rare car now. And it really got me thinking. Like, it really kickstarted this sort of mentality that I have now, that, you know, what was once so damn common and undesirable slowly basically transforms into this unique thing that's so different in today's motoring world. Like, you can never tell how a car's going to age. The most boring car today could be seen as analog and exciting and different and just pure tomorrow. You just don't know that. And nothing sets that more apart than sort of looking at a Camry. I think it was 2017, I bought a Toyota Camry. It was a 1992 SV21 CSI Limited. And I just came across it, and it was $1,200, $1,200. It had one owner. It was a manual, 2-liter, front-wheel drive. And I didn't think much of it. It had air conditioning, great. It had power mirrors, central locking, power steering, and it was in good shape. And I thought, yeah, fuck it, I'll just buy it. And I bought it. We just had it sitting out on the front lawn, and would drive it here and there to the shops and back. It was good on fuel. It was super zippy. Like, it was in a sea of big SUVs and big sedans and stuff. It was just really nice and zippy and fun and engaging. And the engine was really torquey, especially with the manual gearbox, 5-speed. And I even took it on a few long drives and stuff, and I thought, you know what, I should really give it an oil change and stuff like this. And I thought, no, you know what, it's fine as it is. The fucking oil's black, but it's a Camry. Like, what am I going to just spend money on this thing? It's worth nothing. So eventually I decided to sell it. Like, at this point I was broke, I was unemployed, I already had another car, and I was like, you know, I'm just going to get rid of it. It's just sitting here. So I put it up for sale. I thought it would be nice to get $1,200 for it again, what I spent on it. And a man and his daughter showed up, and his daughter said, it's my first car, I really want it, blah, 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 I can only spend $800. So I was like, okay, whatever. I'll take a third off the price for you. And I sold it to her. And I've seen it a few times since, and it's now in the hands of a car collector. And I thought, what the fuck? Like, hang on. So when I saw it, and it was immaculate, it had some new paint on it, things like that. It was just beautiful. And I decided to find another one of those cars. And I looked up Toyota Camry, 1992, SV21, whatever, in all of Australia, not just where I live, all of Australia. And there were two for sale, both station wagons, both automatic. And both were like the poverty pack with the black plastic bumpers, no paint, nothing. Not the nice interior, not the two-tone interior, none of that sort of stuff. And I kept searching sort of every couple of days. I kept refreshing the search and looking all across Australia. And for about a year, not a single sedan popped up, let alone in CSI Limited trim. And so I realized then just how rare that car had become and how desirable it had become. Because if you think about it, like, that is the ideal hipster car now. If you were a young couple and you lived in the city and you worked in the city, and one of you worked at home and the other one probably took the bus or rode a bicycle to work, and you just wanted something fun in the garage. It doesn't have to be fast, but something that you can take to the grocery store, you can go to a friend's barbecue, easy to maintain. You don't have to be like it's not an RX-7 or a Skyline or something, but it's still engaging. It's got that retro charm to it. That would be the ideal car, because you don't have to go out and spend $30,000 on like a new Corolla or something, because you don't need it right now. And you won't lose a cent on it as it sits in your garage. It's just going to be ideal. And so I realized, like, it's basically impossible to find one of those. And I kept looking for a Synos, especially considering the one that I completely destroyed in New Zealand, my first car, was a limited, one of those like spin-off models. Like my highest van is a Living Saloon EX. It's not just a regular highest, it was one of those spin-off things that they did. And the Synos had these factory decals that said like Type X or something on the side of it, and some different interior cloth seats and things like that. And I didn't realize how special it was until, I was well into my 20s. I had always wanted an 80 series Toyota Land Cruiser. And so when I came to Australia in the end of 2012, I bought one, and I quickly realized that it wasn't as nice as the Japanese spec ones, but I bought it. It was in 4.2 litre turbo diesel, 1HDT engine, 5-speed manual, the ideal sort of car. It was dark emerald green, I think it's called. I fixed up all of the paintwork and everything. It was just really nice and tidy, and I drove it maybe for about 3 weeks to a month. Just in original form. Everything was beautiful. I had all the oil leaks fixed, and a brand new clutch, and brand new seals on the front hub and the radiator, and all of that sort of stuff. New hoses, new belts, new timing belt. It was just a beautiful car. The AC was regassed. I had the windows tinted, and if I had just left it at that, it would have been okay. Then I had it lifted, which is great, because I think lifted four-wheel drives, especially older four-wheel drives, look just beautiful with some nice chunky wheels. It already had 3-piece aftermarket alloy wheels on it. They were deep dish. They looked really nice. But around that sort of time, 2013, there used to be a magazine here in Australia. It was like the biggest magazine ever, called Four-Wheel Drive Action. I even wrote a couple of articles for them. And what they were basically just a media marketing hype system. It's all dead and gone now. They've kind of branched off into their different divisions. But all of the four-wheel drive manufacturers for accessories and things like that used to advertise with them, and they had this free DVD that came in, a little case with the magazine that you bought, you paid for every month, basically. And in that DVD and in that magazine, they'd show you all the new products and things, the new suspension, the new spotlights and LED lights and things like that, onboard air compressors and toolkits and storage drawers for the back of your Land Cruiser. So you'd rip the third row seats out and you'd put these storage drawers in, and then a cargo barrier, and then on that cargo barrier all these accessories like a fire extinguisher and a 240 volt power inverter that you can wire up so you can have 240 volt power there, little ovens, things like that, all these little things, hot water shower systems. And when you watch the DVDs, all of the advertisers would pay big money to these guys, and they would go out on these trips. Every DVD, there would be a trip somewhere, and they'd show you, driving on these harsh roads and bumps and things, and they have breakdowns and how they repair it on the side of the road. And they started selling like fucking anything. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they started selling dildos, because every night, and they did it in such a way, it was really patriotic as well. So the fucking Aussies loved it. They were like, you know, like a beer cooler. In Australia, it's like a big deal. Like, you take your can of beer, it's like this foam thing that slips over the can and keeps it cool. And they were just flogging anything, basically. And they'll be like, "G'day, mate. How you doing?" to his co-presenter. And after they just set up camp, and he'll be like, "Oh, I'm all right, mate, you know." And he's like, "How's that new fucking beer cooler going?" He's like, "Mate, I wouldn't leave home without it. You're not a true Aussie four-wheel driver if you don't have one of these in the back of your four-wheel drive." And so all these fucking Aussies went nuts for it. And certain things, I'll be like, "Mate, you need," and they would say this, "Come on, guys, you need this." And it'll be like a rechargeable fucking flashlight or something. "You need this, guys. You know, you're not a true four. I wouldn't go home without it," is what I'm saying. And so that really started playing onto your mind when it was more significant things like diff locks and, I don't know, like brake pads and exhausts and things like that. Like, you need power when you come out here, boys, because you're not going to get through this if you don't have the grunt. So make sure you call these guys and blah, blah, blah. And they've got a kit on at the moment where you can get a chip and an exhaust and this and that, fucking God knows what, all for like $1,200. And it was the cheapest, nastiest shit in the world. And so everyone was doing that. Everyone was modifying it. So my Land Cruiser quickly got like a steel bull bar, a winch, spotlights, a UHF, 2 UHF antennas, one for like long range, one for hilly country, and one for like flat open country, and a dual battery system, and like storage drawers in the back. And then in the back I had all these tools and fencing wire and a mobile welding kit and a spare CV joint and like hub seals and boots and transmission fluid and brake fluid and radiator seal kits and a spare set of belts, a spare set of hoses, and oh my God, like so much fucking shit. And then on the roof rack went all these lights, like spotlights on the front of the roof rack, on the sides, work lights for each fucking side, on the back, work lights there, 2 spare wheels, and like tire repair kits, onboard air compressor, onboard air tank to run fucking air tools. And that was like what people wanted. That was what, like, we wanted this like monstrosity sitting in the fucking driveway that would go anywhere and do any. It looked like something that they would be putting onto like a spaceship to send overseas. And that was the hype then. You know, performance cars changed from like drag cars and drift cars and things like that to these big four-wheel drives, and we're buying all these parts and stuff. And then you couldn't drive them anywhere. You were petrified. Because if you went to your friend's house for a barbecue and you had a couple of beers, and you wouldn't be like, "Oh, I'm just going to spend the night here, mate. No, it's all good." Because you know you've got like $20,000 bolted to the outside of your fucking Land Cruiser parked outside. And chances are when you came outside in the morning, $20,000 would have been unbolted from it. So you were really sort of precautious about where you left it and what you did with it. And not just the shit that you bolted to the outside of it. All of these people knew, like, you had a refrigerator on the inside that was worth like $1,000 at least. You probably had like $1,000 worth of fucking tools in there, and like UHF radios and stereos and subwoofers and all these stupid gauges, exhaust temp gauge because you got to monitor that, and boost gauge because you got to monitor that, and coolant temperature gauge and coolant temperature level warning systems, and all of these fucking things that you just added on. Like I said, with the big tachometers that we had in the cars, the Japanese performance cars, all of those different things. Like, we always, even in those electronically controlled like Skylines and stuff, where we trusted the ECU to manage the air fuel mixture and the ignition timing and all of that, but we had to monitor the boost gauge, because obviously, you know, if the ECU could manage everything else, it could just fuck up the boost randomly. Like, no, we wanted it because the gauges look cool. The pillar-mounted gauges look cool. Everyone had it, so you had to have it. And that's what we did with the Land Cruiser. And the funny thing was, like, when you'd go on a trip to like a remote sort of settlement town or something that you'd be passing through, and you'd watch on this DVD earlier on how difficult it was for them to get there, things like that. And so you're barreling down these dirt roads with your fully kitted out Land Cruiser. You got the big engine, you got the power mods, you got all the electronics on there. You've fucking communicate with a submarine in the middle of the ocean if you wanted to. And you're just rattling along down the road. You can't even hear your passenger because there's tools and shit in the back that's just chiming away, and the antennas for the UHF are flapping around. And then you'd hear something go pop, and you'd go outside and one of the spotlight brackets has cracked just due to fatigue. And then you notice your front bull bar's hanging a bit low, and you look under it and the bolts have come loose on that, and the winch has worked itself loose. And then by the time you get to that little village, you're rolling in at sunset, you're doing like 20 kilometers an hour because your wheel bearings are completely fucked from the massive lift that you have and the huge fuck off tires. And only then do you realize that the whole fucking roof rack is just hanging on by a thread, and all of the little rubber feet that was sort of isolating the sharp metal rack from your nice painted roof has all worked itself loose, and you've now completely fucked the roof of your car as well. And the worst thing then is, after looking at the locals and shit who drive in and out every week to get groceries and whatnot, all of these women are just driving standard fucking Prados and Pajeros, and even like light all-wheel drives, like little Hyundai Tucsons. And they're crossing the same fucking desert, the same roads, and just like normal standard cars with some all-terrain tires. And they live there. And you just look like the ultimate douchebag, like, I made it, I've arrived, I'm here. And they're like, okay, great, the mechanic's down there, he'll fucking sort you out. That you bastards keep him in business, basically. That kind of trend has kind of died off now as well. So I've seen that sort of Japanese performance trend, and that kind of came and went really quickly. And the whole sort of like Earth Roamer look, Land Cruisers and big fuck off four-wheel drives with all these things, that's come and gone as well now. Now we're into like a different trend where it's like the whole blackout phase. Have you noticed like how every car nowadays has black wheels? Like, it doesn't matter if it's a Lamborghini or like an Audi or a BMW or like a little Hyundai performance hatch or a pickup truck or like a big SUV like the new Land Cruiser 300 Series Sport. A lot of them have like black wheels. Some of them come out with just black packs where it's like black paint, black wheels, black flares, black mudguards, black door handles, black mirror caps, black badges, black grills, black fucking everything. And so I really don't like them. Out of all the sort of trends that are coming and going, I really don't like the black trend, because you have to be standing like within 2 feet of the car on a well-lit sunny day to get any sense of like the design lines, the aesthetics of the car. And some of these cars are now being, painted in like a matte black finish. And so to me, it looks like a car with faded paint and dirty wheels. But that, I don't know, that just seems to be the craze at the moment. And even people with just normal cars seem to be putting on like black wheels, black steel wheels, or the more modern utes nowadays. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, but in Australia, it's really common to get a pickup truck and to put like 20-inch black alloy wheels on it, and then really thin, low-profile mud tires. So completely pointless. I just don't get it. But I guess, people like trends, that comes and goes. But one of the trends that kind of pisses me off is, it doesn't piss me off, it's not my car, I don't give a fuck, is with like the videos that I make on my Hi-Ace, which is now 25 years old. It's a little bit newer than the cars in North America. So a lot of the vans there are like 27 years old, some approaching like 30 years old. And it just baffles me, like, now that I know what I know about modifying cars and how these mods don't really last, trends come and go, things like that. Like, think about the Fast and the Furious sort of era days. There were Civics rolling around with fucking decals and spoilers. We didn't care about the quality of the parts. The spoilers would have been made out of like just mild steel or aluminium or whatnot. And can you imagine driving around in one of those Civics today with like the decals all over it, those spoilers, the big tin can fucking exhaust? It would be embarrassing, right? Like, there's some classless people that still do it today. Like, you see them, that hasn't aged well. But I would be personally embarrassed to ride around in something like that. Back when we thought that the original body kits looked like shit, if you found one today in original form with its beautiful original seats, things like that, and it was original, you would be like, wow, that's pretty cool. I would love to have that as like a nice daily driver, something special, something, it's pure, is what I'm trying to say. It's pure. And we were so narrow-minded back in the day as well. Like, let me give you this example. In New Zealand, we didn't really appreciate the 300ZX, the Fair Lady, because we always said it was big, it was fat, it was slow, it was heavy, and it was nothing compared to like a Silvia or a Skyline. The RB ruled, and Nissan completely fucked up the 300ZX. No one wanted it. You could get a 300ZX for like $3,000 because no one really appreciated it. Now, because I'm not so narrow-minded anymore, now when I think back about it, and this is what humans do, we tend to think of the generation before us as not being as knowledgeable. That's not to say as smart, but as knowledgeable as we are today. We know more because we have access to more information. And even before the internet was what it is today, back in the day, we thought that as well. We thought that the designers of the 300ZX didn't know as much as we did, and that they just made something big, fat, and heavy. But now, when I look back to those cars, and actually all of the Japanese performance cars, I realize that hardly any of those cars was designed to compete with one another. Like, if you watch, even to this day, and this is something that literally everyone gets wrong. If you watch videos even made today, there will be like RX-7 versus Supra versus 300ZX, or Skyline GTR, or RX-7 versus GTR versus Supra. And like, if you just look at those three cars, the RX-7, the GTR, and the Supra, all three of those cars were designed for completely different things. They were not designed to be direct competitors in the mild, like even in the slightest fucking amount. The GTR was purely designed as a circuit homologation car. Like, I know I'm getting off topic here, but I just feel like I should say this. And no one seems to understand this. No one seems to know this. The GTR was built for Nissan to enter circuit racing around the world. It was built as no compromise, only for performance. That's why it doesn't have that single tachometer in the middle. It doesn't have that beautiful driver-focused sort of cockpit. It was just built to be modified by Nismo and show up to racetracks around the world and just fuck shit up. Doesn't matter if it was a Ferrari or 40. Doesn't matter if it was a McLaren. The GTR is there just to be modified and just to win races. The Supra was designed as a grand touring sports car. It was designed to be comfortable, to be elegant. If the GTR was a person, it would be Mike Tyson in his prime. It didn't care about you. It didn't care about your credentials. It didn't care if you respected him. It was just going to fuck you up and do it ferociously. It wasn't going to dance around the ring with you. It wasn't going to entertain you in any way. It was just going to rip your head off and then go home and do some cocaine or something. The Supra was, if that was a person, the Supra would have been James Bond. It was designed to be as elegant as the European offerings. It was designed to have that sort of same level of respect and standing. They could have very easily achieved decent power outputs using the 3S GTE 2-litre turbo engine in that car. But in order to get that credibility in sort of the country clubhouse, it had to have that 3-litre inline 6. And so the Supra was designed to be something that you would drive to work with the automatic climate control set, and then you'd take to the golf course and then to the country club, and then you could drive it across to a different state, to a different city to attend a conference or something. And the RX-7 was designed as a no-compromise road sports car. Now, don't get me wrong, like all three of these cars, the RX-7 was modified by Mazda Sport and put into competition. The Supra was modified and put into competition where it raced alongside the GTR. But the RX-7 and the Supra were designed as road cars first, not as a circuit homologation. The GTR's only other competitor in the terms of circuit homologation was the NSX. That was it. There was no other car that was designed to compete on the same level. Whereas the RX-7 was just built to be the most beautiful, the lightest, the most well-balanced, and the most engaging sports car. Not the fastest, not the most ferocious. It wasn't going to rip your neck off. It wasn't going to give you concussion accelerating. It was just meant to be the most well-proportioned, dynamic, elegant, beautiful, nimble, agile, different thing. And so people just got it wrong. There's a video of Keiichi Tsuchiya, who is probably Japan's most famous racing driver. And after he retired, he basically reviewed all of these 90s Japanese performance car heroes, where he apologizes to Mazda last year or the year before. He apologized to Mazda because when he reviewed that car, he gave the RX-7 some pretty bad scores. He bought an RX-7 and he sold it within a year because there was nowhere for him to put his cigarettes. And he said, "I was too narrow-minded. I didn't understand the beauty that you created. Please forgive me. If you make another RX-7, I will buy it and I'll keep my mouth shut." So I just find that interesting. And as for the 300ZX, that was designed to be more like a cinema car. Like, it wasn't meant to be the hero car. It wasn't meant to be like the Fast and the Furious hero cars. It was a car that you could picture living with, and living with for a long time. Like, if you picture Ryan Gosling in the movie Fracture, where he's a lawyer and he's well respected, he's climbing up the ladder, things like that. In the background, he's always got like an old Mercedes convertible that he drives in this sun-kissed, orangey, warm glow of Los Angeles. And he goes about his life, and that car's kind of, with him. You see him driving it, you see it in the background. It's never mentioned, none of that sort of stuff, but it just gives him character. And it's one of those cinema cars. It's not a movie star, it's a cinema car. It's a cinema car that oodles character and charm. It adds to the lead character's decision-making and the kind of person that he is. And you can see it being a real usable thing. It's not in your face. Like if it was an MR2 or like an RX-7 or a McLaren F1 GTR, it would ruin the movie because it's too focused for that. But the 300ZX is a real cinema car. It's like the car, you could picture Ryan Gosling's character driving that every day and just using it because it is a usable car. You could picture driving that thing like 3 or 4 hours to go see your parents in the next town over and spend the weekend with them. You can picture the character, meeting his first high school crush at a diner where she works, pulling up in that car, and then maybe driving that car to Vegas for their honeymoon. And as he progresses on in his career and his life, maybe he puts that car away, but in 20 years or 10 years' time, he pulls it out and gives it to an acquaintance to get it resprayed and brought back on the road. It's a car that you spend a life with. Essentially, it's not the hero. It's not like John Wick's car, where it looks great on film and things like that. But you can imagine trying to drive that thing in traffic every day and living with it every day, with like the squeaks and the rattles and the noise inside and things like that. It wouldn't be a real sort of viable daily prospect. So that's what I wanted to say, and I completely lost where the fuck I was. So it's like a real narrow-minded mindset like we had back then with all these performance cars, not understanding what they were designed for. Like if you look up the original marketing posters and things for the 300ZX, it's not like the MR2's marketing where it's always in the city. You always see the 300ZX or the Fairlady parked along like some desert highway, something, just like observing a sunset in the middle of fucking nowhere. And if you do see it in the city, it's always leaving the city. So like we tend to think of like people before us, like I was saying, like as not being as wise as us, because we've got more modern marketing tools and things like that today. But these guys knew exactly what they were building, and they knew exactly who it was for, and they built that sort of marketing strategy around it when it comes to the 300ZX. And that sort of narrow-minded outlook on cars is still sort of present today, especially when it comes to like the high-A super custom. I've kind of thrown myself in there by making high super custom videos, and it's really fucking scary to me, like the amount of people that get these cars and just almost instantly, like within the first day of owning it, they just start fucking destroying it, like just ripping chunks out of it. And it's not like the van life of people that I'm always going on about. Like they get these cars and immediately it's like on the internet, it's like, does anyone want this seat? They're going in the rubbish bin. Or they're like, oh, I removed my rear heater and look at where I put the new battery. or they like throw the heater core for the rear heat system in the rubbish bin, and it just brings me flashbacks of like the Saphiros that we gutted out and all the other cars that we gutted out back in the day and threw the parts in the bin. And then, 10, 20 years down the line, you sit there because back in the day, you're like, I don't give a shit about my interior. I just want a performance car. That's why I'm modifying it. But 20 years down the line, you sit there and you think, boy, I wish I had an original Skyline again. That would have been so nice to have right now. Because you don't appreciate it when you have it. I'm not talking about those people. You do what you want with your car, you gut it out, you start an Instagram account, and you go out there and you become a van lifer. You shower twice a week in gyms, and you influence people on how to live in a cold, moldy van, and then you write on the Van Life North America Facebook page, you go on there and you let your heart out. I've read this before. They're like, so I've been a van lifer for a little while now, and it's really cold, and I have mold underneath my mattress, and I've tried everything, and the gym won't let me shower anymore, and I'm just really upset. And then people would be like commenting like, yeah, but at least you're free. Yes. And then a few comments down, when they sort of gather themselves together, they're like, I wouldn't change it for anything. Like, they're so miserable, some of them, living this sort of van life thing. It's just, I find it funny. I just find it funny. But a lot of these people are getting these vans, and the minute they get it, and they're like, they're like, hey guys, just ordered an EGR blanking plate, can't wait till it shows up. And I'm like, fuck, here we go. They buy this, piece of metal to block off the EGR. And the next post you see from them like 3 days later is, hey guys, install the EGR blanking plate, but the engine is really violent when it shuts down now. And so everyone's like, yeah, that's normal. So you block the EGR and now it's going to shut down really violently. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do about it. And then so you sit there, and then 3 months later, that person messages you again. It's like, hi Nathan, really enjoy the vids, mate. Do you know where I can get some engine mounts? I removed my EGR blanking. I removed my EGR system, and now the engine shuts down really violently, and I think it's ruined my engine mounts. And I'm like, fuck, I don't know, man. Like, do you see my mentality with this? Like, these cars have survived like 27 to 30 years as reliable pieces of machinery, reliable economical forms of transport around the world. And they've been perfectly fine for a family to drive, short distances, long distances, through icy winters, through very hot, humid summers. And after 30 years, they show up in Florida, and 4 months later, they're fucked. Like, do you think you could be doing something with it that might be fucking it up? It's just funny to me. And kind of like upsetting, because a lot of these people are trying to do the right thing by it. I think they're just reading too much and worrying too much. They're like, but the EGR is really horrible. I say, why are you trying to get rid of it, man? Like, why? Well, it's going to block up the intake. And I said, okay, so how old is your van? It's 27 years old. And is it running all right? It's running fine. Is it good on power? It's good on power. Is it blowing smoke? No. So why are you fucking with it? Because I don't want it to go low on power. I don't want it to blow smoke. I want it to run better. Someone told me I get more response from it. It's going to run cooler. I'm like, okay, buddy. Here's what I would do. Leave it as it is. And then, when it starts to blow smoke, when it starts to run rough, put an EGR blanking plate on it. And I'm like, so I say, look, when it starts to run rough, when it starts to blow smoke, when it gets down on power, and they're like, should I block the EGR then? I'm like, no. When that happens, could be like when it's 30 years old, could be when it's 35 years old, you never know. But when that happens, should I buy an EGR blanking plate now and just hold on to it until that happens? No. Listen to me. When that happens, buy some new intake manifold gaskets, remove the intake manifold, clean everything out, clean up the EGR system, put your new gaskets on, maybe some new injectors and glow plugs at the same time, and put it back together. With an EGR plate? No EGR plate. So once you get it back together, if it survived 30 years with the EGR working as it was designed, once you clean it out, put some new gaskets on, you can expect another 30 years out of it, right? Well, I guess so. So why are you fucking with it? Just leave it as it is. See, that's probably going to piss a few people off, but it just doesn't make sense to me, like why you would do that, block off the EGR. And that's just one example of what people do, you know. It's like, there's this documentary on YouTube, and it's called, the title of the videos is called Deadliest Roads. So if you look that up, I'm not sure if that's a channel name, but basically this camera crew goes out to like the worst fucking places on earth, the most developing. Some of these places I wouldn't even call them developing countries, because, you know, every couple of years there's a fucking coup or like some sort of war or something in these places. They all slash each other to bits, and someone wants power and God knows what. It's utterly miserable. It's terrifying. And you look at these places, the worst places on earth, let's be honest, where the title's called Deadliest Roads, but in 90% of these videos you won't see any roads. They're just like a clearing of mud where people drive. And in all of these videos, what you'll see in the background in every shot, in a couple of these shots, the main car is a Hi-Ace that they're following. Or if you see the cars in the background, they've hired like a Hi-Ace super custom locally to be like the camera car or the follow car. And say, for example, certain countries in Africa, you see these Hi-Aces there alongside their cousins, the Hilux, and other cars like the Pajero and things like that. And they're driving in like 47 degrees Celsius in mud, like thick, sloshy mud. And they've been doing that for like 10 or 15, 20 years in these countries. These guys haven't fit an EGR blanking plate. I would be surprised if these guys changed the fucking engine oil properly and not just dump it, run it through a sock, and put it back, thinking job done. Like, it's when these guys buy fuel, you have to understand this. When they're buying fuel, they're buying it from a stall on the side of the road, and the fuel is in like a 2-year-old plastic Coke bottle, like one of those plastic empty Coke bottles. Someone's filled it up with diesel. It's brown, it's got sediment in it, it's filled with crap. But that's what they buy. They'll buy like a $2 plastic bottle, Coke bottle, full of diesel. And they'll pour that into their diesel tank and then drive like another 20 kilometers through the worst fucking roads ever. And they just do it year after year. In one of these videos, they drive a Hilux through, one of the bridges is broken because it's not a real bridge. It's just, they put logs over rivers and drive over the logs. When the log rots, they drive through the fucking river, and he's driving this Hilux through this river, and he floods the engine. He hydrolocks it, and while it's still in the river, trying to get pulled out, he opens the air filter housing, which is just saturated, and there's like leaves and muddy water and shit going into the intake with the engine off, but you know that shit's going in there. And they undo the the injectors, and turn the engine over. It shoots like diesel and water and oil like 30 feet into the air. And once it's spat all that shit out, they put the injectors back in, plumb it all up, tap the air filter a few times and start the thing up, and off they go again. And that's how they make it run. These cars don't look very good. Most of them have, you know, more cracks and shatters in the windscreen than there is actual clear bits of glass to look through. And most of them have rust, most of them have dents and scratches. Some of the tires are showing the cords and things like that. They put like 10 people on the inside and like 4 people on the roof or 5 people on the roof, plus all this luggage and shit. And it really makes you wonder, like, there are Hi-Aces like the ones that you and me have, running around these countries, in Pakistan, in like the searing hot desert, 50 degrees Celsius. Again, with the same amount of people on the inside, down these fucking goat trails, the paint's completely been sandblasted off, and they're just running just fine. And they continue to run just fine, But for some reason, Jeffrey in Utah will buy a high super custom, and 3 months later, Jeffrey in Utah needs a new engine. And I think some of that does come down to the geography of things. Like in America, you've got really high highway speeds. Like in Australia, the maximum highway speed here is now 110 kilometers an hour, unless you're down one specific highway where it's 130 kilometers an hour. And this is like the difference between the Hi-Ace and the Delica as well, especially the Delica Star Wagon. If you've driven one of those, or one of those, that thing is screaming its head off just doing 100 kilometers an hour. And the Hi-Ace was designed to be an open road cruiser, like a highway cruiser, so it's geared a little bit differently. So the Hi-Ace will easily do like 110 kilometers an hour, but that's pretty much where it wants to stay. I've had mine up to like 130 kilometers an hour overtaking, but really you have to understand these cars were not designed to hold 130 kilometers an hour sustained for long periods of time. The Super Custom with the 1KZ will easily do it, but remember, it's not what you call a gas engine or a petrol engine. The diesels are just built tougher, and people tend to think, well, that's fine, it's built tougher, but it's built tougher for a reason. It's compression ignition. And so when you look at like a petrol engine that needs compression, obviously every internal combustion engine needs some sort of compression. The petrol engine's compression ratio from like brand new, or the PSI of a piston, if you do like a compression test, will be like 150 PSI, right? For like a really good engine. When you look at like the PSI required for like a diesel engine, for like a 1KZ or something, it would be like 450 PSI. And so you add boost on top of that, that is a fuck ton of pressure inside that little combustion chamber. And so all of that rotational mass, the crankshaft, the con rods, all of that shit has to be super fucking fat and heavy to deal with that. And so, unlike a petrol engine where you can rev the shit out of it and stuff, and it's like, yeah, I'm all good. With a diesel, you have a fuck ton of rotational mass. Like, that's a lot of heavy shit that's revving that high. And it just doesn't like it. It builds up a lot of heat. The turbo's working like non-stop. And so when Jeffrey in Utah gets his high super custom, and he'll do the standard sort of Japanese import owner thing where he might change the engine oil, the coolant light will come on, and you'll have to go on the internet and say, hey, anyone know what this light is? And then everyone's going to comment like, oh, it's the Colosseum in Greece or something, blah, blah, blah. There's some bullshit. Oh, so original. And then someone will say, it's your low on coolant, mate. Yeah, but I checked the coolant, it's fine. It's like, no, it's a fucking reservoir tank, you idiot. They'll check that, and they'll be like, oh, it's down on coolant. But if someone doesn't check that, they might do an oil change on it, and then they start flogging the shit out of it, doing 130 kilometers an hour in your great American highways. That thing's not going to last very long. Like, it's out of its element. It's not being driven how it should be. It's being driven beyond what it was designed for, and it just doesn't last long. And then you start adding in all this shit, like putting in EGR blanking plates, and you start opening up a can of worms. Like another thing, just 2 weeks ago, I was browsing the internets, as you do, and I saw this post where a guy's like, hey man, my high super custom isn't starting as well as it used to. I live very high in the mountains. And so I stopped giving advice on cars and shit on the internet now, unless someone messages me directly. And so I thought, well, this will be funny. See what someone says. See what their recommendation is. And so the main comment underneath it was, if you live high in the mountains, you have to adjust it to suit. And I thought, well, isn't that fucking interesting? And I thought, you know what? Nah, fuck it. Don't say anything. And I was like, fuck it. I'll just fucking help this guy out. And I was like, hey, don't listen to it. Don't listen to that. You can't adjust anything, man. Like, have you checked the basics? Is your air filter all right? And is your glow relay working? Is the glow plugs working all right? Is your fuel filter okay? And is it snowing outside? And he didn't reply initially, and then the guy who asked him to adjust something said, no, You need to adjust it to suit the altitude. Trust me, blah, 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 as they go on. And I was like, look, man, like he said, he was trying to tell me how it needs to get more air to start and stuff. And I said, aside from like, I don't know, putting a leaf blower on it, like you can't get more air into the diesel. Diesels run wide open throttle for air, man. Like the only way it increases its RPM and shit isn't by like the butterfly in the throttle body. It's just by adding more fuel. So the only thing you can adjust on the fuel pump on the 1KZ is probably the idle up screw. Other than that, it's electronically controlled. So either you're going to have to fool the sensors into giving it more diesel, which I don't think is the right thing to do if it's, in high altitude, or you're going to have to tune the ECU or flash it or, put a whole different fucking ECU in it, like a Super or something that you've tuned up. And he's trying to tell me, like, back in the day how they used to tune cars and so, and I was like, dude, it's not like a 1979 Cadillac V8. It's not carbureted. You can't tune it. And then so finally he said to me, like, hey, man, like, okay, that might make sense, but I know someone who's got a 2.8 litre 3L engine high ace, and he tuned it and it runs better. And I was like, dude, that's a mechanical fuel pump engine. He's probably just wound the fuel up in it and off he went. So it's little things like that. About a year ago, there was a lot of posts and a lot of people like messaging me like, hey man, I was driving my highest yesterday, really liked the videos by the way, and so I thought I'd just ask you a question. It was running just fine all day and stuff, and then I came home like this morning, went out to start it, just wouldn't start and drained the battery. Do you think I should rip the head off? And I'm like, the fuck, what? Like, what? So, okay, so it's not starting properly, so what happened? It wasn't starting this morning, so I went on Facebook and I asked for some advice. They told me to prime the fuel primer, and so I did that, and it's leaking fuel now. So do you know where I can get one of those? But yeah, the fuel filter primer seems to be okay. Should I replace my injectors? And I'm like, oh, okay, buddy, look, you're just grabbing in the dark now. So don't just diagnose it, man. Like, ultimately, long story short, you know what it was for most of these fucking vans? They were running like the standard sort of diesel fuel. They weren't running Alpine treated diesel fuel. So overnight when they parked their vans and they got their first lot of snow or frost or whatever the fuck you guys get up there, the diesel just gelled up and gummed up. And so a lot of these guys just started ripping into their fucking engines based on internet advice and just destroyed it. And so what do you end up when you start adjusting things, like listening to that guy telling you to get a 14mm spanner out and start adjusting nuts? That's how you get these cars that end up with gremlins. Like you adjust something, the ECU doesn't like it, you adjust something else because someone says, yeah, you got to put this in, you got to remove this vacuum line or plug this vacuum line to make sure that it stops properly. And so you do that, and then there's another issue because now the ECU thinks that it's running 10 degrees hotter than it is, and you know what I mean? You end up with a car that you end up selling, or the previous owner ends up fucking so badly that they just get rid of it, and it just ends up with gremlins its whole life. Like, would you rather not have a nice original engine running the way it was designed? When the EGR blocks itself up and it starts running rough, it's not going to do it overnight. You'll notice it starts smoking and things. Would you rather not just spend like $30 on some new gaskets and maybe like $500 in labor, pull it all out, clean the bitch out, put a new fucking set of gaskets in it, and off you go for another 30 years, get some nice good water temperature sensors, good coolant, good oil, good filters, and drive it how you want. Drive it as hard as you want up whatever fucking hill you find, or drive it as slow as you want, and it'll just be fine instead of just fucking with it and destroying it. That's all I have to say. Like, that's my experience in modifying cars and then missing the fact that I didn't keep any in original form, and that's what I'm trying to do with my car at the moment. I will lift it, I will put some bigger tires on it, because, like I said, old school lifted four-wheel drives look nice. But just be mindful when it comes to modifying cars, especially doing mechanical mods that you might think is benefiting that car. You might just be fucking it up even more. So let me know what you think about this type of video. Don't try and be nice as well. Like, hey, really funny, I only fell asleep 4 times. Because I have this thing where, like, I find it really hard to be negative to people that make YouTube videos. Because even if it's a really dumb video, you know those videos that you click and it's got that, like, robot voice. I do dislike some videos. It's where it's unnecessarily long, and it's like, this guy plugged this USB in. You won't believe what happened next. And it's that cheesy fucking asshole guy with that cheesy fucking asshole voice, and he's like, we all know what a USB stick is. A USB stick was invented in 1989, and it consists of... And it's like, no, what the fuck, man? I just want to see what this guy plugged into his fucking USB port and what happened. And by the end of it, like 18 minutes in, he's like, so when John decided to plug in this USB he found, he discovered that it had a virus in it, and it destroyed his computer. And it's like, oh, you fucking asshole. And so I dislike those. But any other video I dislike, so much so, so much so that I now have this like list of channels that I'm subscribed to that have like 5 or 10 subscribers. And some of these poor guys like upload videos every single day, and they get like 1 view. And so it's almost a fucking full-time job for me now. So much so that when they upload a video, I'll go watch it like 3 or 4 times and make sure I like it, and then I comment on it just because I feel bad for them. And it's gotten to that point now where I'll put one of their videos on my phone, put my phone on mute, and then go leave it on like my bedside table, and then I'll go watch something on my tablet in the lounge. So don't be nice to me just for the sake of being nice. I can handle it. And yeah, have a good one. Stop fucking up your cars. Catch you later.